C-SPAN's Q&A.
Later today on Afterwards, Melissa Boyle-Maley on her book Denial and Deception, an insider's view of the CIA from Iran-Contra to 9/11. Our guest interviewer is Dana Priest, intelligence reporter for The Washington Post. Afterwards, every Sunday at 6 and 9 p.m. Eastern on Book TV on C-SPAN 2.
I am telling him...
Order. The Prime Minister's in order. I'll let him know when he's out of order. Order.
Tonight at 9 on C-SPAN, Question Time from the British House of Commons. Prime Minister Blair will take questions on immigration, the crime rate, housing problems, and Iran.
...is that there is indeed a serious issue as to Iran and nuclear weapons and its obedience to the Atomic Energy Authority. And what we are doing in Europe, in concert with America and others, is trying to make sure that Iran comes into compliance with its international obligations.
Prime Minister's Question Time, tonight at 9 on C-SPAN.
And now a live picture from National Geographic here in Washington, D.C. for an in-depth discussion on today's Iraqi elections, with a group of panelists here in Washington offering their insights on today's events. You will also hear from correspondents reporting live from Iraq, who will interview citizens on what they think about the election and its significance for their country's future. This is hosted by the group Spirit of America. Live coverage now here on C-SPAN.
15, 5, 4, Good day in this extremely important day in the life of Iraq and the Iraqi people. It's the beginning of a historic transition from the 35-year rule of brutal dictator to a new democratically elected government. Hello, I'm Ahmed Arakabi. In the next 2 hours, we will hear from Iraqis about this historic transformation, what voting means to this people, what Iraqis think about the legitimacy of the elections, and what happens next in this country. I'm pleased to be joined by Jim Hake, founder and CEO of Spirit of America, the sponsor of today's program. Jim?
Thank you, Ahmad. Spirit of America is very pleased to present today's program on this great day for freedom. Thank you for joining us, and I especially want to thank all those who have lost loved ones to make this day possible. Our goal is to present a more complete picture of Iraq's election, a ground-level view from the people of Iraq. We also hope to increase the connections between the American people and the Iraqi people. This is something Spirit of America is committed to. In the last year, with the support of 12,000 donors, we have been involved in Afghanistan and Iraq, helping equip schools, libraries, and hospitals, supporting women and pro-democracy groups. Spirit of America is a private charity. We have no affiliation with the U.S. government. Our work is a reflection of the goodwill of the American people. We do what we do to help freedom and peace prevail. Let me tell you something about the unique setup we have here today. To review the election results, we have an expert panel. We will have live on the telephone grassroots correspondents from all corners of Iraq. We have 2 bloggers blogging in English and Arabic. They'll report on comments from Iraq and the U.S. And finally, a studio audience will look on and ask questions. Our host, Ahmad al-Rakabi, spent 5 years as bureau chief for Radio Free Iraq. On April 15, 2003, after the liberation, he was the first person on the air in Iraq. And his first words from a tent in Baghdad were, "Welcome to the new Iraq. Welcome to an Iraq without Saddam." So please join me and welcome the new Iraq and Ahmad al-Rakabi.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you. Well, with me is today Dr. Ghassan Al-Atiyah. He's director of the Iraq Foundation for Development and Democracy in Baghdad, Intifad Qambar, the special envoy of the United Iraqi Alliance, one of the very important lists in the Iraqi elections, and also Mr. Hassan Naimna, director of documentation in the Iraqi Memory Foundation. Welcome, gentlemen. Today's election of the National Assembly is a crucial first step in Iraq's democratic transformation. The 275 members of this new body will now elect or appoint a new president and prime minister. They will also draft a new constitution by August 15. On October 15, the Iraqi people will vote to ratify this new constitution. If approved, on December 15th, a new election for a democratic government will take place. This government will take control at the end of the year. Yesterday I couldn't sleep. So to truly appreciate the magnitude of this day, you need look no further than the people of Iraq and listen to the excitement in their voices. Here's some raw material that came to us via the internet, just a small sampling from a few people and a brief look at celebrations in the streets just before the election.
أخي شنو رأيك بالانتخابات؟ راح تشارك؟
إن شاء الله يشارك الانتخابات لأن كلنا نشارك هذه الانتخابات.
We are going to participate in the elections because it is our national duty. As you know, we, the Turkish Iraqis, have not had any rights for over 80 years. There are no Turkish Iraqis being represented in the interim government. We don't even have a single representative. Our rights have not been properly given to us. We would like to have free and fair elections for the stability of the nation. We would like to turn a new page, as they say, for the Iraqi people who have been oppressed for 35 years. Participating in the elections is a free and democratic demonstration that Iraqis are experiencing for the first time, and this is an unprecedented experience.
Well, as I mentioned to my guests yesterday, I had a very long night. I couldn't sleep thanks to the time difference between Washington and Baghdad. I was receiving all-night phone calls from friends and colleagues in Baghdad congratulating me. One word which I heard a lot yesterday was happy feast. And believe it or not, I was listening to the people in the street saying to each other, happy feast. So it was not an election, normal elections. It was like a holy thing. So forgive me if I'm not focusing that much now, because I really couldn't sleep, and I enjoyed that night. I really enjoyed last night. It was something extraordinary, and I think many Iraqis lived and wished to see what happened in the last hours. But also I would like to ask Dr. Ghassan Al-Atiyah, how was the last hours for you? What did you feel about the last hour?
Well, for the last hours I was glued to the TV and trying to see what they are making out of this story. One point I would like to draw attention to: we in Iraq, we are afraid of high expectation, over optimism, to be met with another false hopes. I should take this incident with great caution, try not to raise the expectation of the Iraqi people, to be realistic about it, because till now we don't know even the result. So the overjoy is too optimistic about it. But the mere fact it took a place, that is by itself a success. But success has to be defined in relative terms. If you ask someone in Ramadi or Fallujah, what do you think of this? And he still lives in a tent like Fallujah. Here, I don't think he will be much impressed with what happened. If you ask someone in Amara or Basra, he will be elated. That's a great day for him. But if you speak to someone in a Sadr city or Thawra, where he has no gas, no electricity, no water, I don't think he will be that much interested in what you are saying too. The media try to make a big deal of this. Iraqi had their hopes raised so many times. They thought things would change dramatically after the fall of Saddam. They didn't. Then there was transfer of sovereignty. People thought this is the silver lining. It turned to be false. Then they thought there is a government of Allawi. They said this will be a real change. It didn't take place. That's why caution is very important.
Many issues. Intifad Qambar, were you happy?
Oh, yeah. Delighted, happy. I was, just like my colleague, glued to the TV, to the telephone, and to the computer screen. I think this is a historic day. I think the Iraqis did a big blow to terrorism in Iraq and to remnants of the Ba'ath and Saddam's regime. I think we have to think of a plan, and we have a lot of work in our hand. Good expectation doesn't come without hard work, and freedom is not free, obviously. We have a plan. We are, as a National Assembly and as representing the United National Alliance, the List 169, we have a plan to first start to have a status of forces agreement, which will put a legal framework for the relation between the U.S. military and multinational forces and the Iraqi government. We have to think how to have Iraqi retain all the sovereignty, and also a new security plan and plans to direct oil resources and revenues to the Iraqi people. Oil is owned by the Iraqi people, not the government.
The election campaign is over now. So I'll go to Dr. Hassan Naimna. You are of Lebanese origin, but you were involved with the Iraqi issue for a while. What was your thoughts about what you've seen?
Actually, talking to friends and colleagues in Baghdad in the past hours, there's indeed a sense of elation, a sense of empowerment, a sense of happiness, and a sense of overjoy. I think the Iraqi society is entitled to that sense, although I tend to agree that we have to view this event as crucial and as important as it was, as being just one step in a long process. And the word that where the value is that needs to be underlined is indeed the word process. Here is really the transformation that is of extreme importance. Now, the legitimacy of political governance in Iraq is no longer going to be derived from one person or from a revolution or from a party. It's going to be derived from a process. And this is what we're seeing in motion. This is a process that started with the fall of the regime, and we can look forward to its culmination only when we have the peaceful transfer of power from one government, from one elected government to the other. This is when we declare the triumph of democracy. Up until then, let's be optimistic and let's see it progressing. And we can be happy about what's happening, and everyone is entitled to be overjoyed even, but we have to view it in perspective.
We'll soon be joined by a caller from Baghdad, but very quickly, who do you expect to be the winner?
The result generally is expected that the same people who are in the power will remain in power, namely the Shia bloc, the government Ayad Allawi.
Their bloc, you mean?
Yes. And the third bloc, not the Shia bloc, definitely not the Shia, but those who adhere to the Marja'iyya, to the Shia religious tendency.
The Grand Ayatollah
yes.
system.
And then the government will be also a bigger bloc, and the Kurds. So as a matter of fact, politically, the political map will not change. If you tell me why, because the kind of electoral system which was adopted, the mean and the finance available to the big parties give them the chances with the absence of the Arab Sunnis who are boycotting this election. So actually the political map will not change much.
Our list is not a Shia list, it's an Iraqi list. We have very prominent Sunnis on the list, such as Sheikh Fawaz al-Jarba and Mudar Shawkat and others. I think the winner really, this is not rhetorical, will be the Iraqi people, because that's what's good about democracy. Democracy has two main things. First, there will be accountability. A minister or prime minister, if he doesn't do well, the National Assembly could draw their approval of his work, and that could cause him trouble. And that's where accountability comes, and that's what lacked in the current interim government. The second thing, the Iraqi people always carries the final say. The constitution, when it's written as a draft, will be finalized by a referendum of the Iraqi people. And then afterward, if somebody does not perform well in the National Assembly, he will be voted out, and somebody will be voted in about 11 months, and so.
And Mr. Hassan.
Clearly, meaning one can argue, and I would tend to agree that the formula used for the election was less than ideal. It was one that emerged as a result of all sorts of compromises and lead to, I tend to agree, to a strengthening of people who are in power or people who have actually the way to get finances. However, I mean, what one needs to stress is that regardless of how we get there, meaning we get to the assembly, the tactical alliances that were created in order to form those lists were exactly that, tactical. And now we're likely to see the emergence of, if you'd like, a reshuffling. This is, again, a symptom, if you'd like, an aspect of a healthy political system, a reshuffling of alliances towards including, hopefully towards including, those who opted out, and in particular, those in the Sunni community.
I have with me Omar calling us from Baghdad. Hello, Omar.
Hello.
What's the mood in Baghdad, Omar?
Well, I think words like happy and joyful are very small if we need to use them to describe this day. This day is much greater than these words. Frankly speaking, I've never seen so many Iraqis smiling as I did this morning. This day has proved the strength of the Iraqi people. Iraqis today defied all the threats of the terrorists and proved how courageous and how brave they are. I've seen optimism and joy and hope in every eye in Baghdad this morning.
So the sound of bombs and AKs didn't really prevent people from going to the polling centers?
Absolutely not. I was walking to the polling center in my neighborhood, and there were loud explosions. Some are near, some are far, and there was gunfire in many occasions. But people really didn't seem to care a little about that. Their minds were all focused on reaching their stations and casting their votes. They didn't seem even to hear any of those explosion sounds.
So, Omar, why do you think people behaved this way? So many people were expecting that the turnout will be very low, that people will fear a possible suicide attack. What's driving people? What's the motivation of the Iraqi people to turn out in such big level, I mean, of participation?
Well, I expected a high turnout months ago. You know, I live in Iraq, and I know my people. Iraqis have been waiting for this opportunity for decades, and they cannot afford to lose this chance.
Omar, thank you very much. We have another caller with us from Baghdad. It's Mohammed. Hello, Mohammed. Can you hear me?
Hi. Hello.
Hello, Mohammed. How is Baghdad now?
Well, Baghdad full of joy, and people are feeling proud of this glorious day and the brave steps that the Iraqi people of this day.
Did you have to walk a long distance to cast your vote?
Yes, actually, I walked about 2 kilometers to reach the voting center.
Were you afraid? Were you reluctant, or did you hesitate to go?
Well, I have many feelings today. I feel proud, I feel joy, I feel happy. The only thing that I didn't feel is the fear today.
So what do you think? What do you expect from this elections? Will this make any difference in your life?
Yes. Iraqi people said it loud to the whole world. Now they have to deal with the people's choice. And the whole world should support and defend the new democracy in Iraq. We put our future in the box today, and I saw optimism and see a good, bright future for Iraq. Iraq will be a model for the whole Middle East and the region.
Well, thank you, Mohammed from Baghdad. Coming up in our next segment, a report from our local correspondent who spent part of her weekend with those voting here in the U.S. And by the way, we'll be hearing from many Iraqi voters here in the States and in Iraq throughout the program during our breaks. Here are the first few. Stay with us. We'll be right back. In the U.S., we've heard so much news of concern for the Iraqi people's safety leading up to this election. Threats of violence at the polling places, questions about voter turnout, extremely heavy security, and so much more. Well, I would like to ask Dr. Ghassan Al-Atiyah, was this day as you expected it to be? At least on the security side.
I see that you are rather insisting on being over-optimistic. On the security side,
not to sell them, just asking you.
In the security side, I wish after the fall of Saddam, they took similar measures to contain the country and maintain its security. Yes, the security was so effective because simply there is no cars allowed to drive. You cannot move from one province to another. You cannot cross the bridge. Bridges are closed. So in that case, actually, there was a total curfew. This is what the economists describe it, democracy at a gunpoint. This is what we have to do, but this has own limitations, and this tells as much as it is good people went to the vote, but we still have a big problem, namely security. And then come the question, where this election will lead us. If it will, the new parliament will emerge a highly polarized one, bigger block of Shiites and the bigger block of Kurds and the government in between with the Arab Sunni absent. This doesn't augur well because, by the way, bad election will lead to trouble. The Kurds had a bad election in 1992, free, and we at the time we were overjoyous. I was among those who was overjoyous about it. But after 2 years or a year, they had civil war and more Kurds were killed by Kurds. So that's why I have to be very cautious.
But did you expect this level of turnout?
I don't know exactly what is the level of turnout. I just came from Baghdad.
According to the committee, the electoral committee, I think
yes,
we heard 72%.
Yes, no, what was expected in debate in Baghdad. The question was, this is the American audience don't know it. A turnout in America of 40% or 45% is great. Because then when you talk about 40%, you talk shared in different areas. But in a newly country where a new Iraq there, the main major component of the society should take part into it. If the Kurd will participate 70%, the Shia 80%, and the Sunni only 15%, this is very dangerous. Because then it is lopsided, then you feel that not everyone is willing to abide by the rule of the game and will not accept the end of the results. So in that case, this is bad election. But if had we a 40% of Sunni and 50% of Shia and 45% of Kurds, no doubt that would have legitimacy. But here the big problem is, especially this new parliament, its job is to draft a new constitution. A constitution is a contract between the component of the Iraqi society. So if you have a missing one, this is not good. Okay.
We have a caller from Najaf. We know how much it costs to call the U.S. from Najaf. We will speak with him in Arabic. مرحبا أخي العزيز.
أهلا وسهلا. حسين الكعبي من النجف.
الأخ حسين كيف كانت الانتخابات اليوم في النجف? I will translate. How was the elections today in Najaf?
يعني today in Najaf the people are so happy because they do at the first time in their life what they want to do, and they want to give their vote in the elections to what they want, and they like to build a new government in Iraq. And the all thing in Najaf today, people and the families, women and men are celebrating because of these elections, and all of them are hoping to succeed in this experience that they do it at the first time. For a long time they prevented to do this thing.
Well,
yes.
Dr. Ghassan Al-Atiyya is saying that maybe we are over-optimistic about what happened today. Do you share his thoughts, or do you disagree with him?
Hello.
Dr. Ghassan Al-Atiyya. Dr. Ghassan Al-Atiyya. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I didn't hear the question.
Shall I ask in English or Arabic? دكتور غسان العطية سمعت كان يقول أنه رغم المشاركة الواسعة اليوم في الانتخابات، لكن النتائج اللي ممكن تترتب على هذه الانتخابات نتيجة مقاطعة سنية إلى حد كبير قد تتمخض عنها نتائج غير سليمة. شنو رأيك في هذا الموضوع؟ In English if you can ask.
In English.
Hello. I think we lost our...
have a chance to participate in writing the constitution after the elections and after making the national...
This is how it sounds when you call Baghdad or any place in Iraq today. Well, let's see what's going on at the blogging desk. I would now like to introduce our two bloggers, Michael Totten and Abdullah Qandil, who have been leading and monitoring email conversations in English and Arabic. Michael, how is the situation there?
there was lots of great stuff in the blogosphere today. The election photos are really popular in both the English language and the Arabic blogosphere. And I uploaded some to the Friends of Democracy site. And if we can, I'd like to show one of our photo galleries here. So the ink-stained finger looks like it's becoming the symbol of Iraq's election. They're displaying it proudly, and there are photos all over the place of the finger here, like we're seeing here. And one of our correspondents in Kirkuk said that he saw more women waiting in line to vote than men. This is anecdotal. I don't know if there really were more women or not, but as you can see in this photo, there's quite a few of them out that day. And in the next one, this photo is actually my favorite one. Notice the tear here in the corner of her eye, and there's that finger again. And thousands of Iraqis, they walked miles and waited in line for hours to vote. And remember, the whole time that they were standing in these lines, they knew they were terrorist targets. Yet they waited and they voted anyway. Here again, we've got that finger with the V for victory. Oops.
Yeah.
And here's a whole busload of the ink-stained fingers.
We've never seen so many fingers in Iraq before. So.
No, and you know, I see a bunch of fingers like this, and I think of it as like, it's like the middle finger to the terrorists and the rejectionists. And here's a great one that we found in the Iraqi blogosphere. Abdullah, what do you have?
Well, thanks, Michael. Some of the commentary in the Arabic website, friendsofdemocracy.net, are one from Khalid al-Khafani from Baghdad. Quote, the Iraqis are celebrating today as the first national holiday in 50 years. We are witnessing something that today we haven't even imagined before. They took to the polls today with large smiles on their faces despite the threat of terrorist attacks. This is a day that will never be forgotten and a success for Iraq and the entire free world. Also, Imad al-Sabbagh, an Iraqi expatriate in Jordan, said, I raised my right hand today with great honor and pride, and I told the Iraqi Border Patrol, these Iraqis are returning from voting at the polls.
Well, thank you, Hassan. Thank you, Michael. And back to my guests here. But before I speak to you, Intifad, I have a caller from Nasiriyah, Zainab from Nasiriyah. Hello, Zainab. Zainab. Okay, we lost Zainab.
Maybe from Ramadi.
Any caller from Ramadi? Please call us. Please call us. Now back to you. Intifad, was this day as you expected it to be?
I think it's exceeded my expectation in terms of how positive it was, and I think I was very impressed by, I heard many of my colleagues in Baghdad and all over the country that one of the extremely positive signs that the turnout for women was extremely high and sometimes exceeded men. That explains that how the Iraqi society is advanced of some countries in the Middle East who even prevent women from driving. I think this is a great day, and I think across the board there are discrepancies in the number of people are voting. I think that's not necessarily represents that a Sunni boycott or a Sunni. I think I heard many stories of Sunnis in Ramadi and Fallujah were eager to come and vote, but they were afraid to go and vote. They were trying to come from the back door. I think this should be blamed on the terrorists. And I think even in the advanced countries, here in the United States, we don't have all communities or all races will vote equally. There's a discrepancy between white Americans and African Americans and Hispanic Americans. I think there's no doubt this election has many faults and many problems, but it's a good start, and it's a start in the right direction. This is the first time the Iraqi people were able to make their voice clear, and they were not heard before. I mean, yes, the United States of America thankfully removed Saddam from power, but liberation was not completed, and then came the occupation, which was a mistake, and now we have elections. The first time Iraqi people could make their say, and you have this tremendous of energy, which is going to be utilized.
Do you agree with Dr. Hassan that these elections may lead to unwanted results at some point?
No, I think these elections, everything has to be followed by hard work and you know, good work. I think the constitution which will be written will be the political consensus for Iraq. The constitution, in my opinion, will be like a political treaty, a social treaty between all Iraqi communities for a better Iraq. If the Sunnis are absent from these elections, they could come and participate effectively in the writing of the constitution, and we could have their voice in this constitution. I think the problems can be solved when people have the best of intentions and when there's democracy and freedom.
Well, thank you, Tifat. Coming up next, we've heard about the violence and the threats against voters for several weeks now. We'll talk to our panel about the reports coming in today regarding the attacks and security threats so far. We'll be right back.
Pillow. JT, pillow. What? Extra pillow. How long is the video? What do we do with it? Bring it over here. Is there 2 people or 3 people on the panel?
He won't do it.
Oh, okay. You've got 3. Right there, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. Caroline, how's mine?
Hutchins and James.
Caroline, how's mine?
Yes, we did.
Yes. What?
Back to this Iraqi election coverage, and we have another call from Baghdad. Hello, Baghdad.
Hello.
Hello, who am I talking to?
This is Khalid Al-Khafaji from Baghdad.
I missed your first name. Anyway, how was the security situation today in Baghdad?
The situation of security is very good. It's very good in Baghdad. There is a less explosion comparison with a normal day before the election, but everything is okay, and the government take care about the security.
Well, it's almost 10:30 at night now in Baghdad. Did you hear any bombs or any explosions this evening?
Until this moment, a little, very little explosion I heard from here at my home. That's all.
Nothing serious today. Couple of explosions.
Yes.
Right.
Less explosion. You can hear 1 or 2. That's all.
Okay. How many do you hear normally?
I heard only 2.
Every night?
Not every night, just this night.
Okay. So what do you expect from this elections?
The Iraqi people expect tomorrow will be better from now, and the government will solve all the problems that Iraqi people faced before.
Well, thank you very much. We wish you all the best in Baghdad. We've just talked about positive news, couple of bombs only, from areas in Iraq where voter turnout was good and there weren't many problems. But there are also plenty of hotspots where violence and threats of violence are very real. Consider some earlier quotes attributed to Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi. Zarqawi vows war on Iraq poll. We have declared a bitter war against the principle of democracy and all those who seek to enact it. Candidates in elections are seeking to become demigods, while those who vote for them are infidels. Zarqawi pledges war on Iraq elections. Insurgents in a town in central Iraq made a gruesome billboard threat to behead Iraqis who take part in the elections. Back to our panel of experts, again to talk about the threat of terrorism, who is fighting the election. Now joining me is Professor Christopher Hitchens. He's an author and journalist, and Hassan Mneima from the Iraqi Memory Foundation, who is fighting the elections.
When did you last hear, let me ask you this, when did you last hear the phrase, the Arab street, in the American media?
I don't know about the American media, but
read it in the New York Times? It used to be used a lot. It was always, we must leave Saddam Hussein alone, because if we overthrow him, the Arab street will be inflamed all around the world. And it was a cheap phrase for what some Western liberals imagined to be Arab or Middle Eastern public opinion. Well, now they actually do have something that is a proper measure of Arab and Kurdish and Iraqi opinion, and the term Arab street has disappeared, because what people meant by the Arab street was people like Zarqawi. They thought that he ventriloquized the true revolutionary feeling of the Muslim world, and now they've been found out as false in this assumption, and I think it's a fantastic fact.
So what street
that this could be put to the
represent?
test. No street at all, not even the back street. It's not even the gutter, not even the sewer underneath the gutter. This is fascism. It should be called by its right name. It is so called by all the Iraqis and Kurds that I know. It seems that they've carried the day. This means that we have a warrant to arrest and destroy such people, treat them as the verminous enemies of democracy and of popular sovereignty that they are, and to dispel, but this is important to me as a non-Iraqi, to dispel the quite widespread illusion among many Westerners that people like Zarqawi really are the true suppressed voice. This is what's been negated today, it seems to me.
The same question. Is Zarqawi now, let's say, the biggest threat for democracy in Iraq?
I would not discount the insurgency that quickly, and I would not pin it down on Zarqawi alone. This is regardless of the fact that Zarqawi is what's in the media. Sorry. This remains a Sunni insurgency, but not an insurgency of the Sunnis. Let's make the distinction between the two.
Well done.
This is, to a large extent, what we have is the remnants of the Ba'ath party, of the Ba'ath regime, reorganized, regrouping, reorganizing, and in alliance with the fringe of the Islamists, of the jihadists, the takfirists, those who consider if you're not with us, you're with the enemy, and therefore it's okay to kill you. In any case, such an insurgency has a source of recruitment and a source of funding, and it needs to be addressed as such. It's not enough to be dismissive of it. It is extremely important to include into what comes next, into whatever political process that comes next, the Sunni community, in order to deny the insurgency. It's basically its victim, which it is trying to recruit, namely the Sunni community.
That's, of course, true. May I just say,
yes, sure. Go ahead.
that would be a more elegant way of saying what I had originally said myself. In fact, I wish I'd spoken second, but I wanted to make a certain solid point for non-Iraqi viewers as well, because of this prevailing illusion. I used to have a wonderful friend at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Professor Israel Shahak. He was a great defender of the Palestinian human rights, and when I used to call him up every now and then, he would say, in answer to my question, how are things, he would say, well, there are encouraging signs of polarization. Because he understood that you don't get any progress without a struggle, that these things don't come in a straight line, and they're never gifted to you, never come as a present. Now, it used to be said that Saddam Hussein represented the Sunni, whereas in fact he represented a minority of the minority, a sort of Tikriti mafia. I don't think it could be said of Mr. Zarqawi he represents even that. He's a wanted man in Jordan, he's a prison enforcer, a rapist, a killer, a psychopath. He's not even an Iraqi. But there are members of the former Ba'ath system who could perhaps make a slightly larger claim than that. The point is that an insurgency based on a minority of a minority has simply no chance of winning. And we ought to be saying to them, in as generous a way as we can, but I think firmly also, don't be the last ones to die for a mistake.
Well, thank you, Chris. CNN was reporting attacks at 8 polling places this morning at 7 a.m. There are approximately 5,500 polling locations across the country. One area where Zarqawi and the Ba'athists showed lots of activities is Mosul, and this is where we're getting our next call from. Hello, Mosul.
Hello.
Who am I talking to?
I am Northern Bird.
Oh, so you don't want to give us your real name, Northern Bird? That's fine. That's
sorry.
fine. That's fine.
I told them.
Okay.
Okay.
So how are the other birds doing in Mosul?
That's the aviary.
Well, what happened today is completely surprising. Security was completely good, though there were some explosions here and there, but they didn't affect the operation. And it is as to the governorate of Mosul, the people who partook in the elections reached 80%. I think this is very surprising.
How did you know it was 80%?
A source from the Qaim Maqamiya of Mosul said he expects this will be 80%.
So he expects, but we don't have any facts now that it was really 80%.
Yes, because it is very difficult to give an exact number or an exact percentage.
Okay.
But it is around 80%.
So we know that the Zarqawi people, the Ba'athists, are very active in Mosul.
Yeah.
So were you afraid because of their activity in Mosul? Are we talking about parts of Mosul which witnessed this participation and maybe other parts didn't have the same turnout?
Okay, let me explain here. Completely to the last hours of yesterday, people had one opinion, not to take part in the elections. But in the course of time today, they were sure that the security is very good, so that they started going to the polling stations or centers, and hour by hour the number increased.
So the centers were open at 7 o'clock?
Vanished. And fear vanished.
Fear vanished, okay. What time people started to go? What time the fear vanished?
Okay. From after 11 a.m.
That's a good time. After breakfast.
Yeah.
And some rest. All right, thank you very much, Mosul, and thank you very much for your call. We wish you all the best there. No doubt there is, apart from the activities of Zarqawi, there is also the activity of the bloggers, very active bloggers, and we have contributions about the troubled areas and what happened today in Iraq as well. Michael, what are you hearing?
My favorite comment is from an Iraqi blogger. He writes in English. His name is Hammurabi. He wrote...
Abu what?
Hammurabi.
Hammurabi.
And he wrote, "Our voting is no to the terrorists, no to the dictatorships, no to hate and racism, no to the fascists, no to the Nazis, no to the mentally retarded tyrants." So that was the negative part. And he went on to say, "Let them bomb and kill us, it will not deter us. Let them send their dogs to suck our bones, we care not. Let them bark, it will not frighten us. Let them see how civilized to be and democratic. Let them die by our vote tomorrow. It is the magic bullet which will kill them. Welcome new Iraq. Welcome freedom and democracy. Welcome peace and prosperity for all nations without exception but terrorists.
Hassan, anything which was of interest? Abdullah, sorry.
Well, from the BBC website, a couple of people commented on the terrorist threats. Ahmad Ayad from Baghdad said, "Our sincere gratitude and appreciation extends to the entire free world for helping make this election a reality despite the terrorist threats from many different angles. We are grateful that terrorism did not deter the Iraqis from exercising their right to vote." Also, Ahmed Ali from Najaf said that the terrorists did their worst, but the Iraqis still prevailed. They are the supporters of Bin Laden and Saddam, but we are supporters of our freedom.
Thank you very much, guys. And of course, stay tuned. We'll revisit the Bloggers Desk a little while later or sooner if developments warrant. Coming up now, next, we have to speak to the panel. That's what's coming up next.
If it's come to that. You're reduced to that. It's pretty hard to follow the Hammurabi blog, I have to say.
So, what do you think of what you heard from the bloggers now?
Well, I was saying to someone on Friday and trying in a way to keep up my own nerve, my own feeling, that cowardice can be very infectious. And there was a constant drizzle of this throughout the American media particularly. Who's going to vote when they've been told their family will be killed? And so I said, well, and maybe I was trying to just keep my own morale. I said, look, cowardice is very infectious. It spreads like a weed, like a plague. But courage is infectious too. And there seemed to be enough Iraqis who said, we will go and do this no matter what. And the example of that seems to have been the decisive one. When someone just said, from Mosul I think it was, I could hardly believe my ears, suddenly fear was gone. I thought, well,
fear vanished.
Okay, I don't feel I've lived to see it, they've lived to see it. Through all of this, all that, it's just, I feel very honored, I should simply say, to be in your company on a day like this.
Hassan, do you think that, the results of today, the fact that we didn't see what we expected, what many of us expected, many car bombs, lots of casualties, do you think that this day will have any impact on the Iraqi mentality in the near future? At least on the security side?
The short answer is I do not think so, because again, this insurgency has been operating on the basis, if you'd like, using the same tool that the regime has used, fear and terror rather than action. Meaning their attempt, they have tried to terrorize the population into not voting. The population ended up voting. This is, if you'd like, this battle has been won by Iraqi society against the terrorists. However, it does not mean that all what they have is fear and terror. Meaning we have to expect, we have to be ready for horrible events coming next on the part of the insurgency. And it's simply a question of down the line being able to overcome, to break that chain, the bondage of fear, if you'd like to really break it. Meaning, one example of what I'm referring to is the fact, for example, that I heard rumors, whether they're true or not does not matter, that the Ba'athis are parading in uniform in Baghdad. Again, notice it might be completely false. The fact that the rumor is there is simply meant to instill terror. So it's an incremental process, meaning as we proceed, if we get to the point of having that terror, that fear dissipate, that would be down the line, if you'd like, the real defeat of...
Okay, we have a phone call now from Kirkuk. Omar from Kirkuk, which is an Iraqi city, a multi-ethnic Iraqi city with Kurds, Turkmens, Arab, and other minorities. Hello, Omar. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Hello there.
Hello, Omar. How was Kirkuk today?
Well, actually, everything was quite easy in Kirkuk. Everyone was going to the elections, and there wasn't any kind of violence or bombing on the streets in Kirkuk.
And no small fights between Kurds, Arabs, Turkmens?
No, there wasn't. Even there's a place, it's called Hawija, district in the countryside of Kirkuk, filled with the people of the Ba'ath. Even there, the people there went to the elections. It was something amazing.
So even in those areas, tell me what time people are starting to visit the polling centers in Kirkuk. We heard one call from Mosul. He said it took some time before fear vanished? How was the level of fear?
7:30.
7:30.
Yep.
And what are the effects you expect? I mean, how this election will reflect itself on the situation in Kirkuk? We know that there are some tensions between the ethnic groups in Kirkuk. Do you think that this elections will have any positive effect on these relations?
Well, actually, it could. If the Turks got their rights in the parliament, it's going to make some change for them. And if the Kurds got their places that they need in the parliament, it's also going to help them. Maybe it will solve some of these problems.
Thank you, Omar from Kirkuk. Coming up next, what about the rest of Iraq, Kurdistan, Najaf, Duhok? We'll have more on what's happening there on this day next.
So I know the polling site for the East Coast was here in Maryland in New Carlton. Now, if you were living in New York and not in Virginia, would you have come to vote?
If I don't have a car, if I don't get a ticket, I may walking on my feet, coming to vote for this great day. And this day, we should not miss it. And I send message to all Iraqi people, regardless of religion, race, anything, please don't miss this day. This is our freedom. This is our day that we prove that Iraq has been united, not as before that the Saddam Hussein classify Iraq based on languages, like Kurdish, Arab part, like they divided in too many pieces for no reason. We are all in peace, one piece of Iraq. So please, Iraqi people, don't miss this day. It's a great feeling.
As she said, Iraqi people don't miss this. It's a great feeling. Now to our panel for a discussion of what has been going on in other parts of Iraq. We heard a phone call from Kirkuk, Mosul. We have other parts where things were expected to be very good, like Kurdistan, for example. And I know you are an expert in the Kurdish affairs. For the Kurds, I mean, this is not the first time they're going for elections, but maybe first time going in national elections.
It's too kind to say that I'm an expert, but it would be true to say that when we were arguing, people like Intifad and myself, for regime change in Iraq before it occurred, we were not just doing so as mere idealists. We were able to say it's already been shown in practice in some of the northern provinces that people can coexist together, that they can begin to create a parliament and a constitution and a judicial process, and they don't have to waste their money anymore on a parasitic army and a parasitic oligarchy. They can use the oil revenues for reconstruction. It's already been done. Now, of course, there were many quarrels among the Kurds in order for this to happen, and many disagreements that are real and historic. And I don't think these are abolished, even by the apparent unity of the two parties, the PUK and the KDP. But the overwhelming feeling, first, that they have a common interest in no going back to Baathism, impossible, the road is blocked, and certainly not being afflicted by bin Ladenism and jihadism. And second, third, if you like, more impressive, they're willing to say, yes, we are Iraqis. We're willing to take our share, to vindicate our stake in Iraq, as long as we're allowed to be considered Kurds as well. Now, after what they've been through, it wouldn't be surprising if Kurds took a sectarian attitude, a tribal attitude, just said, we want out of this. They haven't done so. Bahram Salih, for example, risks his life every day as Deputy Prime Minister to democratize Iraq. This is fantastically impressive.
But yesterday we were able to see, and today in the reports covering the Iraqi elections, there is a Kurdish overjoy.
Yes.
And how do you explain this? I mean, well, we've already mentioned that this is not the first time they experienced the elections.
No, indeed, they've had their own, but I mean, well, the first time I saw Iraqi Kurdistan, I went to Halabja and Kaladiza, and towns that had been leveled and poisoned and destroyed. To have come this far from that is a good enough reason to be overjoyed. Second, to have demonstrated a certain national identity. And third, to have being able to contribute to the liberation of the rest of the country. Unfortunately, I have to say as a friend that I don't think there's enough interest in the elections in Kurdistan, in that there wasn't enough controversy. You know, the parties all in effect united. There were some minority Kurdish groups running on smaller tickets, but there wasn't enough to argue about, in my opinion. It's may sound paradoxical to say so, but it just wasn't enough enough of a quarrel, if you like. What I think elections should be about polarization. I like it when people disagree. And can I just add one thing as an Anglo-American, non-Iraqi, non-Kurd? I'm beginning to get fed up with this constant emphasis on Shia, Kurdish, Sunni. So I've known Etifad for a long time. I've never asked him. I have a feeling if I did ask him, is there a Shia aunt or a Kurdish brother-in-law or a Sunni cousin in your family? He would, if he said there wasn't, he'd be the first Iraqi I'd ever met of whom that was true. I've never met an Iraqi who doesn't have an extended family. So I think it's wrong for the Western press to segregate Iraqis in this way, and I'm pleased to see that even you, in a sense, you sounded surprised that there wasn't more quarrelling in Kirkuk about these matters. I don't know. It seems to me the Iraqis are at least as grown up about ethnic and religious differences as, say, Americans are. But
well,
I defer
your
to
list now, we are somehow, the press is forcing us to use those terms. And what was written about the 169, the list which represent, or the number of the list of the United Iraqi Alliance, which you represent now. This list was accused of being a Shiite list supported by the Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani. And the rumor and the expectations were that the South will give its vote to this list. Is this what you expect? And is this what you think the Shiites in the South did?
Well, Shia have been oppressed in the South, and we saw that from, if you go to the South, you see the infrastructure in the South probably tremendously broken and dysfunctional. It's very, after 1991, when 300,000 Shia were killed in a couple of weeks in the uprising of March, that basically gave the Shia the incentive to become part of a new political system and participate in power. I think Sayyid Sistani's support to this list does not mean this is a Shia list. Sistani is basically, I consider him as an honest broker, not necessarily as a religious man. An honest broker between the Iraqi people and politicians. And I remember before I came, a couple of weeks before I came, actually a couple of months maybe, a group of distinguished Christians met with Sistani. And they were impressed because he told them, I'm worried about you since 1933. This is an Iraqi issue. It's beyond Shia or Sunni or Christian or Kurd. I mean, I think Iraqis realize now in a country that if not everybody gets his rights and get their fair share in power and resources, this country will never settle. And there is a common acknowledgement that the Kurd, really, I've seen many Kurds who worry about the situation in the South because that, at the end of the day, will affect them. We are all in one ship. If it sinks, we sink together. If it, reaches the shore, we're safe together.
One other thing I heard about how the southern people may vote is that they may give their votes to the Alawi list, the prime minister, because he is secular, while your list has more religious flavor in it, so it may bring people with turbans to the power. What do you think of this?
I think this secularism is an important terminology that does not necessarily apply on Iraq. I think what matters in Iraq, even if we have a religious party, is we have a religious party that do not believe in Islamic state or a wilayat faqih state, and that's what matters. Our list agreed upon a very important principle that will not be the next Iraqi state. The constitution will not put a state that imitates Iran or any other Islamic country, and that's what matters. I mean, the ruling party in Turkey is an Islamic party, but it's probably one of the best governments appeared in Turkey. So we must not have this, secularism as a hurdle in our way.
I think it deserves to be said also that Dr. Chalabi, who is number 10, I think, on this list,
yes,
recently made a series of campaign appearances across the South with two quite prominent Sunni leaders who he brought to the rallies to show them and the Shia voters that this is not a sectarian appeal. And I believe that after the campaign rallies were over, he took them to see the shrine of Imam Ali in Najaf, which they'd never seen before, been able to get to visit before, and was demonstrating in practice that it's wrong to think confessionally or tribally. This it seems to me, after what people have been through, and after the attempts to set them against one another, and after the divide and rule tactics of the jihadists and the Baathists, shows an exceptional, honorable maturity.
Well, I know at least Intifada is a secular person. I would be very surprised to see you wearing a turban. Anyway,
nothing Intifada did would surprise me.
We have a call now from the Hawk from northern Iraq. It's Bhutan. Hello, Bhutan.
Hello, sir. Yes, Bhutan Bhavani from the Hook.
How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm fine, thank you.
So you're feeling very well. You sound very good today.
Yes, thank you.
And what's the reason for that? Did you eat well, or did you go to the elections?
No, I'm very curious about the elections here today in the Hook. It was a very happy day for the people going voting today. It starts from 7 o'clock Kurdistan time.
Yes.
You hear me?
Yes, I can. The Hawk is, we have there many Assyrians in the Hawk. So shall we expect the Assyrian list to be the winner there?
The Assyrians, it could be, but the expectations will come out at the results of the elections and the votes. But actually, there are not too many in the Hook city.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, caller from the Hook. Wish you all the best. Well, as we mentioned at the top of our show, we've got the studio audience here to look on and to ask questions of our expert panel. Let's go to our first question. Please, can I hear your name and your question?
My name is Paul Basola, and I'm a resident of Washington, D.C. Ahmad, I'd be interested to know what your guests think of the effect that today's elections and the coming elections and referendums in 2005 in Iraq will have on Iraq's neighboring countries.
Anybody wants that?
I think it will have extensive. I mean, every Arab country, neighboring country, there is the leaders of these countries start their speeches always in this critical time. And because of this critical time, we cannot have elections. And I remember since I was 5 years old, I hear in this critical time, and continues to be critical time, and that's why he has to stay in power. I think this is going to withdraw this from them. I think if there is elections in Baghdad, and Cairo's situation is much better than Baghdad, from security point of view, I think there should be elections in Cairo, and I think people are going to ask for it. And I think we've already seen some signs of it in Saudi Arabia and in Egypt and in many other countries in the Arab world. People start to question, why can't we have elections?
Right. I was very impressed reading yesterday's roundup of the international Iraqi vote, of the overseas expatriate vote, to see how many Iraqis had voted in Damascus and in other polling places in Syria, and how it seemed that the government had behaved with some care to make sure that this could happen, hadn't tried to interfere with it. Now, I have the feeling, I've had it for some time, that the Syrian government is on notice on this point. It knows that it has to de-Baathify. It knows that there's restiveness among its own Kurdish people. There's a big democracy movement spreading in Damascus. One of its leaders, Sadiq al-Azam, was actually quoted in yesterday's Washington Post. And it knows that its grip on Lebanon is not secure, and that there has to be an election of some kind there too, quite soon, probably this spring. So, though I believe that these tendencies were already present in the region and in Egypt and elsewhere and across North Africa too, I think it's unarguable that the successful elections in Iraq has given, and Afghanistan I would add, and among the Palestinians, has given it an extraordinary impetus, further impetus. There's nothing to quarrel with in this interpretation. I don't understand why people are so cynical when President Bush says this is the one region in the world where democracy hasn't yet been properly tried, but it will stop being the last region.
Well, we have another question and another from the audience. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Greg Piper. I write a blog at gregpiper.com, live in the area. I was wondering from both of you, I've heard in the news recently that the Sunnis might be sitting out this election so they can have more influence afterward once a government does come together and try to have more influence that way. If that is true, do you think that's a good sign that they want to be more involved and they will become part of an official government, or a bad sign that they are trying to have more influence than they might have with the people away from the ballot box?
Thank you.
Well, I think I may have said this before, and I hate to sound repetitive, but I have a feeling that the collectivization of the word Sunni is misleading to begin with. We have no reason to think, from what I've heard so far, that the Sunni vote was so much repressed today, either by threat or by abstention. We won't find out for a little while, but it certainly was very much exaggerated. I believe I already said that I have no idea, having known Intifada all this time, how he confessionalizes or sectarianizes his family. I bet you he won't say he's just a Sunni or a Shia. I've hardly ever met an Iraqi who says that about their family. There was an oligarchy around the Ba'ath Party and in certain areas of the country that was identified partly as Sunni, that is going to have trouble adjusting. And I noticed that King Abdullah of Jordan, another man who doesn't have very much to gain by democratic elections, is making pained noises about the plight of this minority. But it's up to them. If they want to be identified with the idea of minority rule, they can. But I can't believe there aren't cleverer people among the Sunni Iraqis who've learned a little more than that from the experience of 30 years of war and revolution and dictatorship and isolation.
I think this Sunni issue is being used as a platform for to give terrorists some sort of recognition, to basically pull the carpet from under the Sunni community or those people who live in these areas, and make it look like as if the Sunnis are resisting this process. That's absolutely not true, and Sunnis who wants to participate in the democratic process are double terrorized. And we have lost one of our leaders in the Iraqi National Congress who is from Fallujah because he was for democracy and was killed by some Ba'athists in his area. The fact is that we must not institutionalize this issue and make it look like this is the problem. The problem there are terrorism, and there are certain people in Iraq, remnants of the Ba'ath and Saddam, who wants to take over power and stay in power, and nobody else will share power with them, and take people from their noses and take them to the right direction, and nobody can argue with them. And they're using these arguments to, to make it look like Iraq is a sectarian place. It is not like this. Unfortunately, a lot of Sunnis in this area has been intimidated and threatened by terrorists there for some period. And we discovered in the first battle in Fallujah in April, there are many high-ranking Ba'athists, especially from the military line, where Shia from Nasiriyah and from Basra fighting in Fallujah and leading the insurgency in Fallujah. So this theory does not necessarily apply. And the only way we can do that, we can turn the table as it happened now. The thing that the terrorists were fighting occupier, they were saying, now they are fighting democracy. They have to admit it. When we are morally clear, when we know what we want, when we do the right thing, terrorists are forced to say what's their real agenda, and that's what made them lose the term here.
By the way, I believe I was told earlier, I think reliably, that though it happened a little later in the day than in other cities, that when people in Fallujah realized there wasn't going to be any serious intimidation, that a lot of them went out late but en masse to the polls. I mean, did you hear this? I was told that it was so.
Well, let's hear...
That, if true, would be a tremendous tribute.
We have Mohammed with us from Baghdad. Hello, Mohammed.
Hello.
You've been listening to our discussion. What do you think about the Sunni participation issue?
Well, I said that from the beginning, that the Sunni people in Iraq do not want to boycott this election, but maybe they were under threat from the terrorist group who tried to prevent the Sunni population from participating in this, and who expect that thousands of people in Fallujah participate in the election today. But it happened.
Yes. Are you yourself a Sunni or a Shia?
I am Iraqi.
Right. Very good answer. Mohammed, thank you very much. Now we will be back in a moment. We'll have a short break and we'll be back.
Very good advertisement. They had gatherings, they had speeches, plus the local channels that broadcast on the satellite dish from northern Iraq had a lot of good programs and discussions, and they explained in details not only the Kurdish list, they explained all the Iraqi list, all the consequences, all the names, and what they can do for Iraq. And plus, don't forget that the internet is very powerful, and the community that I am in touch with in the Washington metropolitan area and in all over the country, because I have good relation with the people in California, in New York, in Michigan. They are all following up daily. Daily, everyone is giving a couple of hours to look in the internet, read the media, and we read both sides. We read the people with and we read the people against, and we compare, and we came to the conclusion that this is the best thing to do.
26,000 Iraqis living in the United States went to the polls here Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in 5 cities across the country. Here on the East Coast, the polling station was in New Carrollton, Maryland, a suburb about 20 miles from the center of Washington, D.C. We sent our correspondent out to witness history being made, and here's what she found.
For most Iraqi expatriates at the New Carrollton polls, voting was a celebration. Voting procedures for registered voters were organized by the International Organization for Migration.
I love this day as the most precious day of my life. As I said, the most important thing is democracy after 80 years of dictatorship and non-representation, or the misrepresentation of Iraq's ruling.
Spokesman Jeremy Copeland was happy with the turnout.
The atmosphere here is incredible. People are happy, everybody's smiling. It's a big family affair almost, and almost like a festival. People are just excited to be here and cheering for each other. Over 2,000 people registered here in New Carrollton alone, and across the United States, more than 25,000. And of course, around the world, in the 14 countries where we have the out-of-country voting program, we had more than 250,000 people register to vote.
So what will you do to the ballots on Sunday?
On Sunday, when the voting is finished at 5 o'clock, the ballots will be gathered in one central place in each of the 5 cities across the United States where there is voting, and they'll be counted there by our staff, and those numbers will be sent to Baghdad, and they will be released there.
Some of the Iraqis who voted today had bitter memories of the Iraq under Saddam Hussein. Yusuf Raouf and his family came from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to cast their first ballot on Saturday.
They destroyed our homes many times. They killed my brothers, cousins, and nephews. More than 120 of my relatives were killed by the former government in the Anfal campaign. This vote is a symbol for putting a stop to the genocide that was witnessed.
So tell me about how you feel. It's your first time voting as a liberated Iraqi.
It's really, to me, it's like you're fighting terrorists. That's how I look at it. I look at it like I'm fighting terrorists today. I don't have a weapon. That's my way out to fight terrorists, and it's an excellent feeling. I cannot describe it. It's something the word would not describe.
How did you feel when you
Well, I am actually celebrating this event because I feel today I'm connecting with my family in Iraq. We are celebrating the same cause and the freedom of making a choice, not being empowered and not being controlled. And this is what I'm celebrating actually today.
An Iraqi Kurd from Kirkuk who has been living in West Virginia for the past 8 years came to the voting poll dressed in the Kurdistan flag. He was overjoyed by today's event.
Today was the greatest day in my life because during the Ba'ath regime, we couldn't vote freely. And this means that you willingly have your hands stamped to vote for justice, your nation, and your country. I hope that every honorable Kurd would go and vote today for their nation and their blue finger.
The overwhelming feeling of Iraqi expatriates here is one of celebration more than party politics. Although ballots were complicated, most people told me that they knew exactly what they were voting for. Bayan Sardashi for Spirit of America in New Carlton Voting Center.
And from New Carlton to Baghdad, and David McDougald, who's the Fox News correspondent. Hello, David.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. David, you've been organizing the poll of the Western correspondents in Baghdad at the convention center. So you were in direct contact with almost quite many correspondents, Western correspondents there. Did they change their minds, or were they surprised by the results of the turnout today?
Well, so far we haven't had any concrete results of the turnout. What we did have was the Iraqi Election Commission here giving some preliminary figures. Now, in some areas they were as high as 95%, other areas down in the 60% mark. But what we're hearing now is that those results were just simply preliminary results from election center officials who were kind of guessing a guesstimate game, playing the guesstimate game of how many people actually were turning outside. And there were a lot of long lines, and that may have pushed those figures higher. In other areas, some polling stations were closed, some polling centers moved. So it boosted the turnout figures in other nearby centers. Now, we're not going to get the final results they tell us for another couple of days until we have some more concrete results on how many people turned out to vote. But the correspondents here were certainly surprised. And pleasantly surprised that the number of people were turning out to vote. And we all think certainly that it's a good thing for the future of Iraq that so many people wanted to participate in their own democratic process.
Well, this day, and I know it's been a bit difficult for journalists to move in Baghdad today and in other parts of the country. Tell me, I mean, how did you cover this thing? What were your sources?
Absolutely. Our main sources here in the Green Zone where we've been covering, and for security reasons and good reason, not traveling around the country today. Our main sources are just being the Independent Election Commission, the United Nations who are here, and Iraqi politicians themselves. We heard twice today from the Prime Minister's spokesman, Tayyar Naqib. Also, we heard from Vice President Jafari. He came and spoke after casting his vote, which he said was a historic event for him, one he'd remember the rest of his life. He even joked that as old as he was, it was the first time he'd cast a ballot. So certainly making an impact on Iraqi politicians today. The President, Al-Yawer, was one of the first to cast his vote very early this morning. So those are the people who are informing the Western journalists who are stuck here, who haven't been able to move around the country, and really giving a lot of access to information. 6 or 7 press conferences today with people giving as much information as possible. And certainly that's also another good sign that the future of Iraq is one of an open media, and certainly very willing to answer all the questions of the Iraqi media who came to these press conferences.
David, do you think that we have some bad things hidden under this overjoy and happiness today?
I think today is a difficult day to judge that. Tomorrow will also be a difficult day. the real judging time will come in the weeks ahead when the extra security measures we've seen over the last week, the curfews, the vehicle bans, when those measures go away and there is maybe a decreased security, maybe a return to not a sense of complacency, but certainly a sense of not being as secure as we have been over the last weeks in the lead up to the election. And that's really the telling time where the Prime Minister's office saying today that a vote by the Iraqi people was a vote against terrorism, and certainly in the television commercials we've been seeing, it's images of groups of citizens facing up to the terrorists, looking them in the eye and staring them down. And that's when this will really show in the longer run, when the security measures aren't as tight as they are now, is whether the Iraqi people do stand up to terrorism and whether they say that enough is enough and now they're turning the corner for a better Iraq.
David McDougall, the Fox News correspondent in Baghdad, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And here are some headlines from today's newspapers. Let's join our panelists again to ask about how journalism on this story was covered. I mean, compares to what is really going on. Did you read the papers today?
Yes, and yesterday and every other day. And I've been a full-time journalist for 35 years now, and I know when the press takes a line, or when it forms a collective conscience, or when it becomes a vector of a conventional wisdom. And I can just tell you, if my instinct is worth anything at all, I can tell you from watching it in Iraq and watching it in Kuwait during the war and the build-up to the war, and since, the entire majority of the Western press placed its bet from the very beginning of this argument on the word quagmire. And they've found it impossible to get off it. The safe thing to do was to predict failure, disaster, defeat in Iraq. And after a bit, it became second nature to people, not just editorial writers, but to reporters, to inflect their stories in this way. And I'm afraid after a while, it became, with some of them, important to keep this going, because otherwise they'd be proved wrong. And then for a small minority, not included in Mr. McDougall's report, he says, everyone hopes this is good. Not everyone hopes that it's good at all. You read Robert Fisk of The Independent, a man who is very popular on the American left at present, who's an open supporter, really, of the insurgency, and who says that the Iraqi people look forward to the vote like the German people looked forward to the bombing of Dresden. You know, this is what passes for analysis and comment in much of the press now. I'm hoping that there will be a really decent reconsideration on the part of a press corps that has regularly misinformed us on this, regularly misrepresented this to us, and which has to admit that today's news, the biggest news in Iraq for a generation, comes to it as a total, absolute surprise. No one who had been relying for information on the American press could have credited what happened today. Only those of us who kept in touch with Iraqis through other means had any sense of what might be coming. So I think it's a fantastic indictment of the press corps.
Well, let's find out. We've got what LA Times has to say about this day. We have with us Elisa Rubin from the LA Times bureau chief in Baghdad. Elisa, hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Tell me about this day, what we are going to read in the Los Angeles Times about this day.
Well, I think you're going to read a lot of different stories. There are about 7 of us around the country.
What's the headline?
Well, I think most of us are very impressed at the courage that Iraqis showed despite a lot of highly publicized threats from insurgents. How impressed that people went to vote in large numbers. It was slow in the morning when people were trying to get a sense of just how dangerous it might be, and then as it seemed not so risky, more and more people came out, and we saw long lines, certainly in the south. Also, Kurdistan obviously had considerable turnout. The Sunni areas were much less well represented, but Baghdad, despite predictions that there would be low turnout, ended up having quite a large percentage of people.
Did this surprise you?
Voting.
Were you surprised by this?
I was surprised in some areas, yes. I wasn't surprised in the south at all. We've heard consistently that everyone planned to vote there. and the same in Kurdistan. But Baghdad is very complicated. There's been a lot of threats here in recent weeks. People have felt very precarious, and I think we're on the fence about many people whether to vote. They wanted to vote, many of them, but were afraid. And the security measures that were put in place seem to have I think largely worked to really make it a much quieter day and give people confidence that they could go out without being running into a suicide bomber, which is terribly frightening for people here.
So can we say that the LA reports tomorrow will be a bit different, more happy, comparing
I don't know about happy or unhappy, but I think we all feel it was a profound moment. There's no question, and I know I've talked to some of my colleagues and who are in different places than where I am, and we were very moved, very moved.
Well, Elisa from the LA Times, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. And now back to the audience. The gentleman here, can you please introduce yourself?
My name is Gordon Johnson. I'm a retired businessman in Alexandria, Virginia. And following the money, I have a question about the perils, the dangers of the oil money if it falls in wrong hands, not only corruption, but other thuggery and worse things that can happen with oil money. Has there been any attention during the election? Has there been any of the bloggers, of the newspapers? Is anybody addressing this issue of the oil and how to protect it so that it really belongs to the people instead of not to the government? Has there been talk of, for example, a set-aside of oil money and pay it direct to the people right away, so they would have a feeling of ownership in the oil money, and the government might have to go to them to get money instead of getting free money, which is the way the government will work. It would be particularly bad, obviously, if Zarqawi were to control the money. But even in good hands, sometimes oil money can lead to bad things.
Hassan from the Iraqi Memory Foundation, did you notice any of this?
Yeah, actually, I am aware of discussions and proposals that are in circulation, under consideration within the in Iraqi political circles for exactly trying to avoid the so-called Dutch syndrome, meaning the whole idea of a rentier state, a state that relies not on taxation, not on its population in order to get its revenue, but on outside sources of income such as oil. And for the time being, really, this is not an issue, meaning the corruption is an issue at all times. But with regard to oil, because oil production is not up to the point where we need to concern ourselves with that today. However, I mean, clearly proposals of the sort, such as passing the oil money to the population and then have the population give its mandate to the government are under consideration.
Thank you, Hassan. Anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I mean, Steve Clemens, I think it was, of the New America Foundation, first came up, to my knowledge, with the idea of making Iraq into, if you like, a stakeholder society by giving everyone a bit of the oil revenue, something that they could identify with, as well as some much-needed income. You could set against that the idea that there will be great need for what might be described as more public or collective works of reconstruction on everything from reflooding the marshes to rebuilding the infrastructure, the dams, the schools, many other things. And then, of course, there would also be the question, which we can't avoid, that some of the oil-rich areas, such as Kirkuk, are disputed by different kinds of Iraqi, shall we say. I mean, it's not completely clear. And one wouldn't want it to become yet another source of bad blood, if you like. But overall, and astonishingly, I mean, the terrible thing is that Iraq isn't drowning in oil, let alone oil money. It is barely pumping enough to keep alive. And so much of its oil revenue was, it seems, misappropriated by the United Nations Blood for Oil program in the meanwhile, that we haven't got to the point where there's that much wealth to, so to speak, distribute. But we have every reason to think that Iraq's proven oil reserves are greater and probably better quality than those of Saudi Arabia, which would be nice, because another reason to recuperate Iraqi oil industry, it seems to me, is to break the Saudi monopoly.
Do you think, Hassan, that the oil issue was an issue during this election? I mean, was it used as an issue to track the voters, for example?
By the oil issue, meaning...
I mean, was it an election issue?
As far as I know, it was not proposed as part of the program of any list. However, there was talk about such considerations. I do not think it was an issue. I'd like actually to go back just slightly to the role of the media, because I think that I do agree with the whole notion that the media is an amplifier of a certain sense of the so-called common wisdom. And once the common wisdom gets established as being negative, quagmire, as you mentioned, indeed we get that amplifier. A cautionary note on the other side. I mean, now this has been a good day. This has been a great day. And as I mentioned before, I mean, people have the right to be overjoyed for today. However, it's important not to have the media, if you'd like, go overboard in the other direction and portray it as if, therefore, there are no problems, everything is fine. Actually...
not much danger of that.
We're likely to see quite a bit of, if you'd like, the grind of the status quo continue in what comes, and any changes are by necessity going to be evolutionary, not revolutionary. I know that the word revolution has been used plenty in the course of describing what has happened today. I'd much rather prefer to think of it and to see it as an evolutionary step rather than a revolution. Let the revolutions be something of the past. I think everyone benefits from that.
Fair enough. But it doesn't alter the fact that a few months ago I was being told by every pseudo-expert I knew every day, every time I opened my paper, that Muqtada Sadr was the coming man, the wave of the future, the spokesman of the oppressed in Iraq. I didn't believe it. I had good reason not to know that it wasn't true. But I was bullied by the idea every day. I was told,
so why do you
he is the leader of the masses, and now...
Do they do it on purpose?
Yes, some of them do. Some of them want it to fail, without question. I could name you some names. Some of them are so invested in the idea that it will be a quagmire that they don't want to lose their reputations by changing the story, and some of them are just megaphones for frauds and worse, such as Mr. Zarqawi, who's politely called an insurgent when he isn't even an Iraqi. It seems to me outrageous that this has been allowed to go on for so long, and the main, let's not say the main, a salient point to me of these elections is this ought to put that kind of stuff to rest. We will no longer be hearing from the American press corps who is and is not the spokesman for the ground-down oppressed Iraqi people. They've made their own choice on that, and I hope, I don't believe, but I hope, and I'll be there to try and make sure that my colleagues respect this decision, which they have not so far. The New York Times editorially called for these elections not to happen. I think, Alyssa is one of the better reporters, the one you just heard from. I think the same could be said of her newspaper. I better not say that without being sure. The general line of the American press was these elections should either not be held or should have been postponed. That's what we're up against. So this is a victim against the conventional wisdom in our own country.
Hassan, the Arabic press definitely will cover this and will write a lot of things about this. How do you think Al Jazeera will be dealing with this issue?
Again, I mean, we can, it can be easily said that there is a strain within Arab culture, within the Arabic press, that does not wish the Iraq experiment to succeed. Because, to a large extent because of U.S. involvement in it, but also for other considerations. However, it would be unfair for us to portray the Arab press as a bulk, as a totality, as a monolith in that direction. Actually, even within Al Jazeera and definitely within the other outlets, there has been quite an attempt at trying to balance the, if you'd like, ideologically driven view of anything that America touches is negative, okay, by basically looking at the facts as they are on the ground. So my expectation, because of basically the better than expected outcome that we have had, as far as we can tell, up until now, that is, my expectation is that the Arab press will also have the role of an amplifier, and we're likely to see some support, some enthusiasm for what has happened. Although that does not deny that the other strains, meaning of negativity, will always be there. They're more ideologically driven, if you'd like, than being empirical, but the scene is complex, meaning I find it at times a little bit, how shall I say, too unfair to have, how shall I say, dismissal of the Arab press as if it is nothing but negative about it. There is positive and there is negative.
Well, let's move to the bloggers front or the bloggers desk. Any news there?
Well, I asked readers of our Friends of Democracy site if they thought Americans really understand what is going on in Iraq right now. And I got a lot of good answers. Here's one of them from a reader named Rick Sisson. Americans who want to know. Americans who are content to be spoon-fed a 5-minute recaplet on the nightly news don't. I watched a new network newscast for the first time in years earlier this week. It was a potent reminder of why I don't waste my time with them. Negative, melodramatic, doom and gloom, tilted toward defeat. Give me a dozen good websites with commentary from 100 or more viewpoints instead. I could spend hours reading blogs, analysis, press conference, transcripts, etc. I decide what's really happening, not Brian Williams. Great thing about a blog is anybody can start one. Anybody can write their own headline. And the best one I've seen today is on the Iraqi blog, the Iraq the Model. It says, the people have won, and it's true, they have.
Abdullah, anything interesting?
Well, the headlines on the most part throughout the Arabic internet from sites such as Al Jazeera and BBC Arabic generally describe the election as a success for Iraq and for democracy at large. One headline on Al Jazeera read, "The Iraqi people overcame the distress of this election and await the results of their votes." However, Al Jazeera also reported a weak voter turnout outside of Iraq. Another headline read, "The pessimism of some Iraqi officials over the reality of the Iraqi vision for democracy." And a third or fourth Al Jazeera headline described the fears of the Arab world of a Shi'i Iraqi government in power. BBC reported that today is a holiday for democratic Iraq. It is a historic day for it and the world. A few other headlines on BBC reported election success despite attacks and killings. Terror did not deter Iraq.
Thank you, Abdullah. Coming up next, the future of the new Iraq, predictions and a glimpse into our panelists' crystal ball. Stay with us.
We as reporters, me personally as a reporter for the Radio Free Iraq, have a responsibility to cover the elections. Today I met with the Executive Election Board, which supervises the elections in Duhok, and we received the primary work that the council has prepared for us. The election process is going very well, and we are waiting for the specified period tomorrow, God willing, between 7 and 5, to cover the elections. For the first time, we have free and democratic elections in Iraq. We, as Iraqi citizens and citizens of Kurdistan, are very excited because we are seeing this for the first time. Although there are some terrorists who would like to stop the elections, but their attempts will not stop us. The elections will go on to save Iraq from this destruction. We are happy with these free elections. We as Kurds are not afraid, as we have already passed through similar circumstances, and we will learn more in the future, God willing. I'm voting for the Kurdish people who have sacrificed their blood for their country and for freedom and democracy. God willing, the Kurds will win and make for a stronger Iraq. The election process is the duty of every honorable Iraqi citizen. We need the elections so we could have a legitimate government that would help us again independence from the American occupation. And we hope that it would be a modern government that will protect its citizens. The elections are great. It is the way to achieve stability and security in Iraq. And of course, we have to free ourselves from the occupation because this is one country and it should be independent. The voter would be choosing an independent government that would achieve the will and wishes of the people. That is why I am voting. Voting is our national duty. We have missed the political experience for 35 years, and especially since we are the majority, 65%, I mean. So, as for me, I am voting. We hope that all the Iraqi people will overcome their fears and try to reach the voting centers and stand in the face of terrorism and explosions and sacrifice for this country, which has given them everything. They should offer their voices for the sake of Iraq.
Welcome back. We are joined again by Jim Hague, founder and CEO of Spirit of America, to help us wrap up our program by looking into the future with our panel of experts. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Ahmad. I'd like to ask you a question. Your turn. I know that your father risked his life, left Iraq because he was in danger many years ago, that he stood for a free Iraq. I know that you risk your life running Radio Dijla, that you've been under attack and death threat. And yet you're still here, you're still moving Iraq forward, trying your best, I know. Why do you do it? Why not take a better paying job somewhere else with no risk?
Well, it's difficult and simple to answer this question. But Iraq, it's a treasure worth hunting and worth taking care of. I have my roots there. I have my history there. I'm proud of this place. This is the first place which witnessed the first letters. This is the place which witnessed the birth of mathematics, of physics, of all the sciences, which is bringing all this modern technology to us. This is a place which gave a lot to humanity. We should take care of it. I think it's our duty. I belong to that place, and wherever I go, I will always be there. I will always be there. At least for my father, who fought the previous regime for 35 years, at least to achieve justice, at least to make sure that before he died, he will be able to see that justice was achieved, that what he lived for really happened. The dream he wanted to see really took place. At least for my father, I will do this.
Good. And Intifad, we have talked about the potential and existing violence that happened today in Iraq, focused on the threats to Iraqis. And our listeners and audience here today are almost entirely Americans, many of whom have lost or know families that have lost loved ones for this. So for them, from your perspective, is it worth it? Was it worth it?
Yes, I think, like my colleague Ahmed, Iraq is the cradle of civilization, and it's truly so. And it's a great society. It's diverse. I think it's microcosm for humanity's work, and I think it's a great thing to work to get democracy in Iraq, specifically when there's such a bunch of thugs and killers in power for 35 years, ruling this country, bring it back to the mid-centuries. And I think also Iraq presents to me and to many people as a great opportunity for the Middle East. It's probably the last opportunity for the Middle East to come around and become democratic, diverse, in which human rights are respected, individual rights are respected. And I think as many people who did not follow the conventional wisdom, like my friend Hitchens, they were saying that Iraq will be the place where democracy will start. And I think we were, helping the Iraqi people to liberate themselves and encouraging the United States to help us liberate Iraq for that specific purpose. It wasn't for WMDs. It was because of the principles of individual rights, human rights, and the future of the Middle East.
And Ahmad, in terms of those families that have injured or loved ones in America, what do you say to them?
Well, I think they should be proud of their sons and daughters. Their effort was worth a lot. I'm sure many Iraqis will not forget this contribution, which brought a different life to them. It's not perfect today in Iraq. Absolutely not. It's not the thing or the kind of society we dreamt about. We are going that way. We are moving toward that society. We are moving toward that country which we would like to see. It's not there yet, but we are taking the right steps. And without those sons of America and girls, daughters of America, I don't think we could have achieved this. I know many Iraqis, actually, who pray every day for those guys. I saw old women, I saw old men, Muslims, by the way, praying for those soldiers. Mistakes happen. That environment could drive many people mad. It could put you under a lot of pressure. But at the end of the day, what was done was something which will never be forgotten by the Iraqis. The fact that the Iraqis are celebrating today, this could have never, ever happened without those American sons and daughters.
Do we still have Omar and Mohammed on the line?
Yes, Jim.
Who's that?
I think we have Omar with us.
Omar. So everyone knows Omar is part of an organization in Baghdad called Friends of Democracy. And it's them who put many of the correspondence that we talked to together in place. So Omar, we're finishing our comments today, and I'm wondering if you can tell us what you and your family think is important for the American people to know about today.
Well, I think what happened today sends a message to the world that those millions of Iraqis who marched with all this bravery this morning to the polling stations are all grateful for the people and for the administrations of the coalition countries who made this happen. I'm sure that the vast majority of Iraqis appreciate their freedom, the freedom that they won after decades of brutal dictatorship. And thus, those people appreciate the efforts and the sacrifices and every single drop of blood that was shed for the sake of their freedom.
And what do you say about the predictions of civil war coming in the wake of the election today?
No, I don't think that's possible in any way. What we saw this morning was the Iraqi people standing united against the threats that aim at destroying their country. Iraqis are capable of overcoming their differences and their disputes. I'm not expecting these elections to be perfect. We can't expect perfection from first-time elections. But why I'm very optimistic is that this is not going to be the last time we have elections. There will be other times, and we'll have the chance to reevaluate the situation and to stand in front of the box once again and to overcome all the hardships that may appear.
Well, as we say in the United States with elections, practice, practice, practice. So the best of luck to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jim.
And we want to go to our bloggers to see if there's a question for the panelists. Mike?
Yeah, I've got a question. Here's a question from a reader and a fellow blogger who goes by the name of The Final Historian. He says, is there anything we as Americans can learn from the experience of our Iraqi friends? Christopher, do you want to take that one?
Well,
it's more a question for an American than an Iraqi, I think.
I used to say before the intervention took place, I was always trying to point out to people that the Iraqi and Kurdish opposition to Saddam Hussein was in some ways doing our fighting for us. We knew there was an unpostponable reckoning with this guy down the road. We knew that he was a hideous danger to his own society and to neighboring societies. We knew he stood for the totalitarian and the terrorist principle, and that he'd have to be done with someday. Meanwhile, it was Iraqis and Kurds who were fighting against him for us. So many Iraqis, many Americans and many British people, of course, have died for Iraq, but many Iraqis and Kurds have also died for our cause. I think what that means is that we should cultivate and cherish our sense of international solidarity and our sense of the common enemy, the totalitarian terrorist alliance. And we should think of this day as one of many victories that will eventually not just defeat, but humiliate and discredit that side.
Well, yes, please.
I'm an Iraqi American, so I qualify. I think the message is freedom and liberty. It's what makes America have real allies in the world and the Middle East. And the idea, which circulates in some foreign service people or intelligence people here in Washington, that stability with dictatorships comes before liberty, has proven to be wrong. Mm-hmm. The only way to achieve real stability through real democracies, and the only real friends of the American people are democracies. They're not dictators. America must abandon their dictators and improve on their democracy. Support in the Middle East.
Well, I think it's a great note to wrap up on. One of the things with Spirit of America that we've seen in the last 12 months of our work is that in the time that I've spent in Iraq myself, that in addition to the commitment of the Iraqi people to their future, what we witnessed today, what a wonderful, wonderful day, that the American people, as citizens, not as the government, although the government commitment is so important, but the American people, in their support of the Iraqi people, can make the crucial difference. And so, in little ways and large ways, what we have had, I mentioned we have 12,000 donors that have contributed to libraries and schools and hospitals, women's sewing centers, men's construction programs in Iraq. So the most important thing, and one of the most encouraging things, I think, is that the American people can make the crucial difference in this equation and help the tough times which are bound to lie ahead. Today is a very happy celebration, and it should be. But there are hard times. And I think that the American people can really make a difference. Yes. Ahmad?
Well, I think today's election is probably a reminder for the American people about the importance of freedom. Many Americans were born free, able to vote, to run for elections, to travel, to do whatever they want, to express themselves free. And after a while, I think many forgot the importance of this freedom and how much it means if you lose it. And probably it's a reminder of their own history as well, of the early Americans who fought for the freedom of this country. Maybe they learn to appreciate the efforts of the fathers of this nation, the American nation. I know the importance of freedom. I know how much freedom is worth because I and many others with me were deprived from this. So when we have it, we know how much it's worth. And it costs a lot. So the lesson or the message from the Iraqi people to the American people is take care of your freedom.
Great. And on that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, all of our panelists, the folks here, our bloggers, the blogosphere for pitching in here. And I'd like to encourage you to help courageous Iraqis like these and those we've heard from in Iraq today. When you have a chance, visit Spirit of America's website. It's www.spiritofamerica.net. And if you like to help children, help out with children. If women's centers and pro-democracy groups are of interest to you, you can make a difference there. So again, thank you very much for joining us. It's a great day for freedom and a great day for Iraq. Guys, great job. I have to scoot. I will see you. We're having dinner at 6 o'clock tonight. We'll just meet.
If you missed any of this program, we will re-air it beginning in just a few moments. But before we get to that, we want to give you a sense of how the international press is covering the Iraq election as we check a few websites. Here's the BBC and this headline. The first multi-party election in Iraq for 50 years has been declared a success at the end of polling. Iraq election declared a success. You can read that story by John Simpson. Matt Spitalnik with Reuters posts this story, and there are pictures to go along with it. Millions of Iraqis vote, 35 die in attacks. Millions of Iraqis flock to the vote in an historic election on Sunday, defying insurgents who killed 35 people in a bloody assault on the poll. And now to Al Jazeera. Confusion surrounds the Iraq poll turnout. Confusion surrounds turnout statistics in Iraq's election, with the country's election commission backtracking on a statement that 72% had voted and top politicians insisting their turnout was high. That from Al Jazeera. We do feature links to some of these stories on our website at cspan.org. You can go to that. If you go to cspan.org and look under media organizations, you will find links on our website. And now President Bush, he offered his thoughts on the Democratic election in Iraq. Earlier today, the president spoke from the White House.
Today, the people of Iraq have spoken to the world, and the world is hearing the voice of freedom from the center of the Middle East. In great numbers and under great risk, Iraqis have shown their commitment to democracy. By participating in free elections, the Iraqi people have firmly rejected the anti-democratic ideology of the terrorists. They have refused to be intimidated by thugs and assassins. And they have demonstrated the kind of courage that is always the foundation of self-government. Some Iraqis were killed while exercising their rights as citizens. We also mourn the American and British military personnel who lost their lives today. Their sacrifices were made in a vital cause of freedom, peace in a troubled region, and a more secure future for us all. The Iraqi people themselves made this election a resounding success. Brave patriots stepped forward as candidates. Many citizens volunteered as poll workers. More than 100,000 Iraqi security force personnel guarded polling places and conducted operations against terrorist groups. One news account told of a voter who had lost a leg in a terror attack last year and went to the polls today despite threats of violence. He said, "I would have crawled here if I had to. I don't want terrorists to kill other Iraqis like they tried to kill me. Today, I am voting for peace." Across Iraq today, men and women have taken rightful